Oakley Adams slammed the tailgate of his old pickup shut, the sound echoing through the frozen forest like a gunshot, just as his 6-year-old daughter, Nova, came sprinting through the snow toward him, pink cheeks and all. "Daddy." "You forgot your gloves again," she huffed, holding them out with tiny mittened hands. He chuckled, ruffling her curls. "Don't need gloves when you've got firewood to chop. Keeps me warm." It wasn't a joke. The only thing keeping them warm most nights was the wood he chopped himself. Oakley didn't have much, just a run-down trailer, hand-me-down boots, and a heart that beat for the little girl who meant everything to him. Life in Pinebrook, Montana, wasn't glamorous, but he made it work. He repaired cabins during the summer, plowed private roads in the winter, and right now he was hauling firewood up a winding mountain path to the last cabin on the ridge. Some rich city woman had rented it for the winter alone. No husband, no kids, just a note through the lodge saying she'd pay double if someone kept the firewood stocked and the snow cleared. Oakley didn't ask questions. He needed every dollar. Nova skipped beside him, humming as he walked up the icy porch steps of the log cabin. He knocked out of courtesy, even though he knew she wouldn't answer. She never did. But this time the door swung open, and there she was. Wearing a thick cream sweater and leggings, her long dark hair pulled into a low ponytail, her face flushed from the heat inside. She looked nothing like what he expected for someone paying triple the usual rate. She looked tired, lonely, and beautiful. "Hi," she said, brows raised slightly. "I didn't know someone was coming today." Oakley shifted the bundle of wood in his arms. "Didn't mean to bother you, ma'am." "Just here to drop off the firewood." Nova peeked out from behind his leg. "Hi, I'm Nova. Daddy says you're from the city. Do you have a dog?" The woman blinked, then laughed. Really laughed. It was the kind of laugh that sounded like it hadn't been used in a long time. "No dog," she said, crouching so she was eye level with Nova, "but I do miss mine. He's with my assistant in New York." "I like your house," Nova said. "It smells like cookies." "Because I've been stressed baking cookies for the past hour," the woman said, standing. She looked at Oakley. "Do you want some? I made too many." Oakley gave a hesitant nod. "We won't stay long." She stepped aside and they entered. The inside of the cabin was warm, golden light bouncing off wood-paneled walls. It smelled like cinnamon and sugar. "I'm Brielle," she said, offering her hand. "Brielle Nolan." "Oakley Adams," he replied, shaking it. Her hand was soft, like she hadn't worked a day outside in her life. "This is Nova." Nova was already halfway through her second cookie. "You bake better than Daddy." "I believe it," Brielle said with a smile, then turned to Oakley. "If you've got time, I could use a hand getting the fireplace in the bedroom going." "I tried, but—" He followed her down the hall, trying not to notice the way her sweater clung to her waist or how she smelled like vanilla and something expensive. As he stacked the logs and got the fire roaring, she leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "So you chop all this wood yourself? Every stick? And you do this for all the cabins, just the ones that ask?" She hesitated, then asked, "Is it just you and Nova?" "Yeah," he said, wiping his hands. "Her mom left when she was 3. Couldn't handle the quiet." Brielle didn't say anything, but her gaze softened. Later, as they left, she bundled a tin of cookies into Oakley's hand and ruffled Nova's curls. "Come back soon, okay?" Nova beamed. "We will." They came back 2 days later with more firewood, and then again a few days after that. Each time, Brielle lingered in the doorway a little longer. She started offering hot cocoa, then soup, then asking questions. Oakley never asked her what she did for a living. He assumed marketing or publishing, something remote and polished. But the more they talked, the more he realized she wasn't just escaping the city, she was running from something. One snowy afternoon, they ended up sitting on her porch, Nova curled up by the fire inside while Brielle handed Oakley a mug of coffee. "I'm not used to it," she said quietly. "The silence, the slowness, but I think I needed it." He glanced at her. "You don't seem like the kind of woman who needs anything." She laughed under her breath. "That's the problem. I've spent so long being everything for everyone, I forgot how to just be." He didn't know what to say to that, so he didn't say anything. But when their hands brushed on the porch rail, she didn't pull away, and that was the start of it. She started coming outside when he arrived, helping him stack wood, laughing with Nova. and one day, when a blizzard rolled in early, she insisted they stay the night. Nova fell asleep in front of the fire, curled in a blanket. Oakley stood, about to grab his coat. "You don't have to go," Brielle said softly. He hesitated. "I don't want to make anything weird." "You're not." She stepped closer. "You make it better." There was something in her eyes, raw, honest, and a little scared, and before he could overthink it, she kissed him. It wasn't desperate or fast. It was soft, slow, real. When they broke apart, she whispered, "I've never met anyone like you." He brushed his fingers down her cheek. "I'm just a guy with an axe and a daughter." She smiled. "You're more than that." And in that moment, he believed her. Neither of them knew exactly what they were falling into. But the snow kept falling, and inside that warm cabin, something real had started to grow. The snow had melted into thick slush by the time March rolled around, and with it came the first signs of thaw both in the world and in Oakley's chest. What had started as a few shared evenings and quiet mornings now stretched into something more, something unspeakably fragile but undeniably real. He hadn't meant to fall for her, not a woman like that. But every time, Brielle opened her door and looked at him like he wasn't just another man hauling wood up a mountain. It chipped away at the wall he'd built since Nova's mother vanished. Late one afternoon, while Nova was at her friend's place down the hill, supervised by the kindly retired couple who treated her like a granddaughter, Oakley, and Brielle stood beside her kitchen counter, flour scattered across the marble like snow. She was rolling out pastry dough, her hair pinned up with a pencil, humming under her breath. "You know," she said, brushing flour off her wrist, "when I first booked this place, I thought I'd be gone in a week." Oakley leaned against the counter. "Because of the cold, because of myself," she said, not looking up. "I didn't think I could sit still. But then you showed up in that truck, and your daughter barreled into my cabin like she owned it, and suddenly silence didn't feel so loud anymore." He watched her press the dough into a pan. "You talk like someone who's used to noise." "I am." Her voice dipped quieter. "I ran a company that employed over 200 people. Every decision, every crisis, every lawsuit, it all landed on my desk. I wore suits that cost more than my first car and got used to people calling me by my last name." Oakley ran a hand along the edge of the counter. "And now you're covered in flour, baking pies in a cabin no one can find without chains on their tires." She finally looked up, her eyes steady. "I think I like this version of me better." He didn't say anything right away. There were things he didn't understand about her world. He didn't know what it meant to be responsible for a payroll that big, to have assistants and legal teams and board members. But he knew what it meant to be tired. To be alone, to want something softer than what you were handed. "Why'd you leave it?" he asked. She hesitated, then reached for the sugar. "My father died in October. Heart attack. He was the reason I got into business in the first place. I thought if I could just keep climbing, he'd be proud enough to notice. But when I cleaned out his apartment, I found boxes of newspaper clippings about me. Interviews, stock charts, magazine covers. He'd noticed all along, he just never said it." Oakley's voice was quiet. "That's a hard way to find out," she nodded, pouring the filling into the crust. "I kept thinking if he saw me now, flour in my hair, living in a borrowed cabin, he'd be disappointed. But lately," she glanced up, "lately I think he'd understand. Maybe even be proud of this too." Oakley crossed the room and took the pan from her hands, setting it gently on the counter. "I don't know much about what your dad would think, but I know you made this place feel like home. That's got to count for something." She stepped closer, her hand brushing against his. "You make it feel that way too." The moment stretched a quiet, humming tension that wrapped around them like warmth from the oven. But just as her fingers curled around his wrist, the sound of tires crunching snow outside broke the spell. She blinked, stepping back. "I wasn't expecting anyone." Oakley moved to the window, peering out. A black SUV, far newer than anything driven in town, idled at the bottom of the driveway. A man in a wool coat and polished boots climbed out, scanning the cabin with a frown. His presence didn't match the quiet of the mountain or the scent of fresh baked pie. It felt like someone had dropped a Wall Street executive into a painting of a winter idol. Brielle's face paled. "That's Eric, friend of yours?" Oakley asked, already knowing the answer. "My CFO." She moved to the sink, rinsing her hands quickly. "He's not supposed to be here." The knock at the door was sharp, impatient. When she opened it, Eric stepped inside without waiting. "You've fallen off the face of the earth, Bri. I've been trying to reach you for weeks." "I needed space," she said, voice firm. "You can't just disappear. The board is panicking. The shareholders are restless. We're about to close the Paris deal and no one knows where the hell you are." "I'm not coming back," she said, arms crossed. Eric stared at her like she'd lost her mind. "You're the CEO of a billion-dollar company. You don't get to just walk away." Oakley stood silently, arms folded, watching the exchange. He didn't belong in that conversation, not in the clothes he wore, not with the calluses on his palms. But when Eric's gaze flicked to him with thinly veiled disdain, something inside Oakley tightened. "And who's this?" Eric asked. The lumberjack, Brielle's jaw tightened. "This is Oakley. He's important to me." Eric looked between them and gave a short, humorless laugh. "You've completely lost it." Brielle stepped forward. "I haven't lost anything. I've finally found something real." Eric's expression turned cold. "If you walk away now, Brielle, you'll lose everything you built, your seat on the board, your shares, the company." "I don't care," she said. "Not if it costs me the only peace I've felt in 10 years. Eric's lips pressed into a thin line. "You'll regret this." Then he turned and walked out, the door slamming shut behind him. Brielle stood still for a long moment. Then she exhaled shakily and turned to Oakley. "I just walked away from everything," she whispered. He stepped forward, cupping her cheek gently. "Then maybe now you can finally build something that matters." Her eyes welled, and this time when she leaned into him, it wasn't with uncertainty, it was with a choice. And Oakley knew, as he held her close in that quiet cabin, that nothing about their lives would ever be the same again. Brielle didn't sleep that night. The pie sat untouched on the counter. The fire died to embers, and outside, the wind clawed at the windows like it was trying to pull her back into the world she'd just walked away from. Oakley hadn't pressed her for answers before leaving. He just wrapped Nova in her coat, nodded once, and said, "We'll check on you tomorrow." Then he was gone, headlights disappearing down the slope, leaving her alone in a silence that didn't comfort her now it roared. She woke the next morning to a knock, not Oakley's, gentler and deliberate. This was faster, urgent. When she opened the door, a woman stood there in a tailored coat, breath puffing in the air, a small leather bag slung over her shoulder. "Vive." Brielle blinked. "How did you?" "I was already on a flight when Eric called," the woman said, stepping inside without waiting. "You think I'd let him botch everything alone?" Vivian was her attorney, and one of the few people in her old life she'd ever trusted. She looked around the cabin, her eyes landing on the scattered flour, the stack of firewood, the thick blanket tossed over the couch. "You've gone full frontier," she said. Brielle crossed her arms. "I'm not coming back." Vivian raised an eyebrow. "You walked away from a company with a valuation north of $2 billion. You didn't take your laptop, your files, or even a toothbrush. You just disappeared." "I didn't disappear. I stepped back." "No, Bri," Vivian said, voice sharper now. "You stepped off a cliff. You left without naming a successor. The board's in chaos. Legal's trying to contain the rumors. And Eric, he's already making moves. You gave him an opening." Brielle's stomach turned. "Let him have it." "I don't care." Vivian stared. "You say that now. But in 6 months, when your name's been erased from every corner of the company you built." "I didn't build it to keep my name on the door," Brielle snapped. "I built it because I thought it would make me whole." Vivian's expression softened, but only slightly. "And does chopping onions in a log cabin with a child running circles around your ankles make you feel whole?" Brielle looked out the frosted window. The sky was pale, the trees heavy with snow. Somewhere down the mountain, Oakley was probably loading salt into the back of his truck or fixing a broken pipe for someone who'd forgotten to winterize it, and she missed him like a part of her had been carved out. "Yes," she whispered. Vivian sighed, setting her bag on the table. "Then we need to talk strategy, because if you don't make a move, Eric will, and it won't be good." Brielle nodded slowly. "I'll think about it." "No," Vivian stepped closer. "You'll act. Starting with this, you're going to make a public statement, not for him. For the people who believed in you." Brielle didn't argue, but her mind wasn't on Eric or press releases. Later that afternoon, she drove down to town. The snow had hardened into slick sheets, but she managed the winding roads in low gear. She parked in front of the general store, heart pounding, and stepped inside. Oakley was at the counter, talking to the owner about a batch of cracked pipe fittings. He turned when she entered and something in his face changed, not surprised but wary. "I didn't expect to see you today," he said, brushing his hands off on his jeans. "I needed to talk to you," Brielle said. "Privately." The owner gave a nod and disappeared into the back. They stood in the quiet store, surrounded by shelves of canned goods and winter gloves. "I didn't tell you who I was," she began. "Not really. I let you believe I was just someone renting a cabin." "You didn't lie," he said carefully, "but you didn't tell the whole truth either." "I was scared," she admitted, voice low. "Not of you. Of losing the only version of myself I actually liked." He studied her, his face unreadable. "I'm not asking you to understand my world," she said. "I'm just asking you to believe that what happened between us wasn't part of it. It was real." He nodded once. "It was." Relief flickered in her chest. "But I've got a daughter," he said. "And I've seen what happens when people leave. I can't let Nova get attached to someone who's just passing through." "I'm not passing through," she said quickly. "I meant it when I said I wanted to stay." He didn't speak for a moment, then quietly, then stay. "But not just in the cabin, be here, be part of this." "I want that," she said, "but I also have to go back briefly. I have to put things in motion so I can leave it all behind the right way." He looked at her, then nodded. "Then go, handle it." She stepped forward, her hand brushing his, "And when I come back," his eyes met hers, "then we'll talk about what's next." She left early the next morning. Vivian had arranged everything: jet, hotel, a string of meetings. It was like stepping into a life that no longer fit. The office was colder than she remembered. The boardroom more sterile. Eric didn't look at her when she entered, but everyone else did. She stood at the head of the table, no notes, no slides. "I'm stepping down," she said simply. Effective immediately, murmurs erupted. Eric's head snapped up. "I've already named a successor," she continued. "Someone who understands the culture we built. Someone who won't sell it off for parts." Eric rose. "You can't do that without a vote." "I can," she said calmly. "And I have." It took 2 days to finalize everything. She handed over passwords, keys, and contracts. And when it was done, when the last signature was inked, she walked out of that glass building and didn't look back. By the time she returned to Pinebrook, the roads were muddy with melt, and the cabin smelled faintly of pine and smoke. She found Oakley fixing a fence near the tree line, Nova tossing snowballs at a stump. When he looked up, his eyes locked on hers. "I'm back," she said, breath catching. "Yeah," he said, setting the hammer down. "I can see that." And as she walked toward him, boots crunching over thawing earth, she knew she wasn't just coming home, she was choosing it. Spring crept into Pinebrook slowly, like it wasn't quite sure it belonged. The snow that had once silenced the mountains now melted into rushing streams and muddy trails, and with each passing day, the cold edge in the air softened. So did something in Oakley. He stood on the porch of a small timber frame he'd started building years ago, only half finished and forgotten after Nova's mother left. Now tools lay scattered around him, fresh lumber leaned against the railing, and new windows waited to be installed. For the first time in a long while, he was building something again on purpose. Nova sat cross-legged nearby, drawing crooked flowers on scraps of plywood. She looked up when Brielle's SUV came into view, tires kicking up wet gravel. Miss Brielle's back. Oakley wiped his hands on a rag, heart thudding like it had when she first kissed him. But this time he didn't feel caught off guard. He felt ready. Brielle stepped out, her coat still creased from travel, but her eyes steady. "Hey," she said. "You're really here," he replied. "I didn't come back to visit," she said. "I came back to stay." Nova darted forward and wrapped her arms around Brielle's waist. "Did you bring cookies?" Brielle laughed. "Not this time." "But I did bring something better." She opened the back hatch and pulled out a folded quilt, a battered suitcase, and a thick book with a leather cover. Oakley watched as she knelt beside Nova and opened it. "This is for you," she said. "It's called a sketch diary. You draw on one side and write whatever you want on the other." Nova turned the pages reverently. "I'm gonna fill it up." "I hope you do." As Nova skipped toward the porch, Oakley stepped closer. "You sure about this?" he asked. "It's not quiet here in the ways you're used to." "I don't need quiet," Brielle said. I need real, he nodded once. There's something I want to show you. They walked around the side of the property to the unfinished frame. The grass had started pushing through patches of old snow, and the wind carried the scent of pine and wet soil. I started this when Nova was a baby, Oakley said. Thought maybe one day we'd live in it. Then things fell apart and I let it sit. But lately I've been thinking about finishing it. Brielle touched one of the beams. It's beautiful. It's not much yet. It doesn't have to be, she said. That's the whole point. He looked at her, taking in the new calmness in her face. Something had shifted in her since she returned. She wasn't running anymore. I want to help, she said. With the house, with everything. You don't know what you're offering. I do, she said. I want to make this our home, not just yours, ours. Oakley swallowed hard. Then we'll do it together. She leaned in and kissed him, not with hesitation, but with certainty. There was no backdrop of firelight or blizzards this time, just two people beneath a gray sky, figuring out what came next. Over the next weeks, things changed in ways that didn't need to be dramatic to feel life-altering. Brielle found work she could do remotely, not with a title, but as a consultant for small women-owned startups quietly, without press, without offices. She set up a desk in the sunroom of the cabin, where Nova often sat beside her, sketching or asking questions about numbers Brielle happily answered. Oakley continued to take odd jobs, but now he had help with the house. Brielle brought her own ideas space for a reading nook, a kitchen window over the sink with a view of the ridge, a garden plot near the back. They made decisions together, and every nail he drove into the beams felt like a promise. One evening, after Nova had fallen asleep on a makeshift cot in the half-built bedroom, Brielle stepped outside and found Oakley sitting on a tree stump, staring up at the stars. She handed him a mug of tea and sat beside him. My mother called today, she said. He raised an eyebrow. You two talk much, not in years, she said. But somehow, after all the press died down, she called just to say she was proud of me, not for the company, for walking away from it. Oakley tilted his head. That mattered to you? I didn't think it did, she said. But it felt like closing a door that's been open too long. He took her hand. You've already built something better here, she looked around. It's odd, isn't it? I spent years chasing recognition. Now I'm happiest when I'm covered in sawdust and making pancakes for a 6-year-old. Oakley smiled. You're good at both. I love her, Brielle said suddenly. I love Nova. I didn't expect it, but it's there. He looked at her quiet. And I love you, she added. I didn't expect that either. Oakley set his mug down and pulled her into his lap, arms wrapped around her waist like it was the only place she was ever meant to be. I'm not good with words, he said, but I've never felt this before, not like this. She rested her forehead against his. You don't have to say it. I want to, he said. I love you too. That spring they finished the house. It wasn't lavish, but it had wide windows, hand-built shelves, and a porch that looked out over the ridge. Brielle planted wildflowers in the front garden. Nova painted a sign that read The Adams Place, even before anyone suggested the name. On the first warm evening of May, Oakley brought Brielle to the ridge where the sun dipped behind the mountains, and the air smelled like new pine and fresh earth. He didn't have a diamond. He didn't get down on one knee. He reached into his coat and pulled out a small silver ring shaped like a pine cone. It's not fancy, he said, but it's strong, and it kind of reminds me of you. She took it with trembling hands, tears slipping down her cheeks. I don't need fancy, she whispered. I just need you. They married a month later barefoot in the grass behind the cabin, Nova tossing petals from a woven basket, the neighbors crowding around with pies and cider. There were no photographers, no headlines, no shareholders, just love. And laughter. And a life they built one board, one word, one kiss at a time. The first real thunderstorm of summer rolled in just after dusk, chasing a wave of warm air through the valley. The rain came down in sheets, hammering against the roof of the finished house with a rhythm that echoed through every beam Oakley and Brielle had raised together. Inside, the lights flickered once, but held. Brielle stood barefoot in the kitchen, her dress brushing the tops of her knees, her fingers dusted with flour from the peach galette she was preparing. The windows fogged with the contrast of warm air inside and the cool storm outside, and the scent of cinnamon and stone fruit filled the room. Nova sat at the small dining table, carefully threading colored beads onto a string for a bracelet. Her tongue poked between her lips in concentration, and every few minutes, she'd hold up her handiwork for approval. A pair of Oakley's worn flannel shirts had been sewn into new cushion covers, and the living room beyond looked lived in a way that no cabin rental ever could. Oakley returned from the barn just after the first crack of thunder. Water dripped from his hair and soaked his sleeves, but he was laughing, holding a lopsided wooden sign with a carved arrow. "What's that?" Brielle asked as she wiped her hands on a towel. "New addition to the property," he said, holding it out. "Nova wanted a trail marker for the path behind the ridge. We carved it together this afternoon." Nova held up her beaded bracelet proudly. "It says Secret Meadow." Brielle took the sign, tracing the letters with her thumb. "You and your dad are trouble when you team up." Oakley leaned over and kissed her temple. "You knew that when you married me." She turned to him, her expression shifting. "I got a letter today from the nonprofit I've been helping in Missoula. They want me to join the advisory board." "Just a few calls a month, nothing too serious." He lifted an eyebrow. "You thinking of saying yes?" "I already did," she said. "It's the first thing I've accepted that doesn't make me feel like I'm putting on someone else's shoes." He nodded slowly. "You're building something new." "I'm not the only one," she said, glancing toward the hallway. "You've been disappearing after dinner all week. What are you hiding in that shed?" Nova perked up. "Don't tell her, Daddy." Oakley laughed and set the sign down. All right. But she's going to find out eventually." The storm rattled the windows again, and Brielle stepped to the stove, checking on the galette. The crust had turned golden, the filling bubbling slightly at the edges. She pulled it out, set it on the counter, and reached for plates. Later that night, after Nova had fallen asleep under a blanket of fairy lights strung above her loft bed, Oakley took Brielle's hand and led her out the back door. The rain had stopped, leaving the world thick with the scent of wet earth and pine. Fireflies blinked low over the damp grass. He guided her down the narrow path behind the house, past the new trail marker, and into the clearing beyond. Beneath a canvas tarp strung between two trees stood a wooden bench, a narrow table, and a row of hand-built planters already sprouting green shoots. A string of soft yellow lights wrapped around the posts, casting a gentle glow across the space. "I know you miss your rooftop garden," he said. "Figured we'd make our own version out here." She stared, speechless. "There's a bench for reading," he added, rubbing the back of his neck. Nova picked the color, "And the plants are all stuff you said you liked: herbs, tomatoes, even lavender." Brielle turned to him slowly. "You built me a garden in the forest," he shrugged. "You built me a life." She reached up and kissed him, slow and certain, her hands curling behind his neck as the night closed in around them. Lightning flashed in the distance, but the sky above their little clearing stayed clear. "I never thought I'd feel this settled," she whispered. "Not in a place like this, not with a man like you." Oakley's voice was low. "I never thought I'd get a second chance that felt like a first one." They stood there, wrapped in each other, while the world grew quiet again. Summer came in full, and with it, routines that felt like home. Mornings started with pancakes and shared crossword puzzles. Afternoons passed in the garden or on long walks through the woods, Nova collecting wildflowers and naming every squirrel she saw. Brielle taught her how to braid hair, and Oakley taught her how to whittle. Evenings ended with stories on the porch, stars winking above as if they'd been waiting for this little family to take root. Brielle's parents visited once in late July, driving up from Oregon in a rented SUV. They stayed 2 nights in the guest room and left with tears in their eyes and a promise to return for Thanksgiving. Her mother had brought a box of old photographs, ones Brielle had never seen, and after dinner, they sat around the table laughing over faded snapshots and stories that made the past feel less like a shadow and more like something that had simply led her here. One afternoon, while Oakley was sanding the new barn window frame and Brielle was kneeling in the garden thinning carrots, Nova ran up with a folded piece of paper. "I wrote something," she said, tugging on Brielle's sleeve. Brielle opened it and read aloud. "This is my family. We live in the trees. My mom is nice and makes muffins. My dad is strong and likes rocks. I am fast and can climb. We are happy. She smiled, her throat tight. "That's beautiful," she said softly. "It's for school," Nova added, "but I wanted you to have it first." Brielle hugged her tightly. "Thank you for letting me be your mom," Nova beamed. "You were always gonna be." That night, Brielle framed the note and hung it beside the front door. Years later, the house still stood strong, weathered by seasons but filled with warmth. The trail to the secret meadow had widened, and the garden had grown into a small orchard. Nova became a teenager with paint on her jeans and ideas bigger than the mountains. Brielle's hair turned silver at the temples, and Oakley's shoulders remained strong, still carrying firewood and fixing fences. But every evening, no matter what the day had brought, they ended up side by side on the porch swing, fingers laced, watching the stars blink alive one by one. They didn't need the city. They didn't need the noise. They had each other, and that was more than enough.